Going on, guys? So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be doing some basic maintenance on my father's 2000 Holden Caprice. It's just going to be a basic oil change and filter change. I've had a few friends ask me about what's involved in doing an oil change, so it's not really that difficult. I understand some of you know how to do an oil change, not everyone does. And not everyone wants to take their car to a mechanic and pay $80, $100, $120, $150 for an oil change. So today we're using cheap oil filter from Super Cheap Auto. I think it costs like $12. Some Gulf Western semi-synthetic oil. And the tools that we're going to be using today are just a basic 1/2" ratchet, 13mm socket, oil filter removal tool, which I may or may not need depending on how tight it was done up last time. I've put the car up. Always use safety stands. In my case, both sets of safety stands are under the NA MX-5. So I've got the 3-ton jack under the car, and I've placed an old rim under there as well. So if the jack does fail, it should still give me enough time to get out from underneath and get out of harm's way. I've already raised the car up. Now it's still got the factory under tray on it. From what I can see, it's only 4 13mm bolts. So I'm going to drop that, and I'll give you a step-by-step as I'm doing it. It's only going to be a short video. It shouldn't take me no longer than 20 minutes to do tops. Alright, so now that I've removed the under tray, I've exposed the sump plug and the oil filter. This is pretty easy to work on an LS motor. Holden or General Motors have actually made things relatively easy for you to work on. It's not really in tight, awkward places. So from memory, this is a 15mm nut, and then I can just most likely unscrew the filter by hand. It should only really be hand tight, and then once it's at hand tight, about 1/4 of a turn. You don't want to go over tightening it. You do, however, want to make sure when you take your oil filter off that the O-ring is still in the filter. I've only had it happen once before on my NB MX-5, where I've taken it out, forgot to look at it, put the new filter on, started the car, it was fine. The moment I moved the car and the pressure had built up, it sprayed out as the seal had stuck inside, so it was 2 seals. I'm just going to grab the oil tray and then we'll get to it. Okay, now I have put the oil pan down. I've also put down an old floor mat, a rubber backed one, just in case some oil does spill. It'll land on the old floor mat that I don't really care about. So, the fun part, not getting covered in oil. Now the car's been sitting for about 2 years. It was a daily driver. My father and my stepmother bought this back in 2003, I believe. It was a daily driver for my stepmother. However, 2 years ago, they brought a Hyundai SUV. So my father decided to keep this, fix it up, and it doesn't really require much. Clears peeling on the bonnet. AC system needs to be repaired, and that's about it really. So while this is draining, another thing to remember is you want to open your oil cap. Alright, so I've got it off, a little bit of playing around. Now with opening the oil pan, theoretically should allow the oil to flow out a little bit easier, releases some of the pressure. I am going to drop it down so it's more level. However, as I've only got a small 5 or 6 litre oil pan, I'm going to have to re-plug it and then drain it. Again, as this is almost completely full. Hot tip, keep your old oil containers. You can drain your oil into the old container, and here we drop them off at our local super cheap auto, which I believe is the same as AutoZone if you're from North America. Okay, so I've just drained the oil that I've collected already. Still got to continue to drain the sump. So as the oil's been sitting for the last 2 years, the reason we're doing a cheap oil flush is all the gunk that's built up in it. Actually, it's not really good to just start a car, drive around, whether it's something that you've bought secondhand, something that you've got sitting around. The oil degrades over time and can lead to catastrophic failure. And while building a high horsepower motor is always fun, it's not something that my father intends on doing, as this is just to clean up and drive occasionally once it's back on the road. Anyway, we'll get back to the oil change. Now while that's draining, I'm just going to lower the car. A little bit too quick for my liking. Right. Okay, so the oil's pretty much all completely drained. Still a tiny little bit at the bottom. We've jacked the car back up. The crush washer on the sump is still in good condition, although I advise changing them every time you do a service. Prevent leaks. For now, since this is just going to be a cheap oil flush, I'm just going to put it back on. And then once I've nicked this up, I'm going to remove the oil filter. Another quarter of a turn, not even. You want to be careful that you don't cross thread and strip the threads. You're not going to have a fun time. Now, can I do it without? No. And this is the part where I'm probably going to drop it and end up wearing half of the oil that's in the pan. So the O-ring is still on the filter, which is a good sign. Otherwise I'd have to go into the toolbox and get my little pick tools to pick it out. Okay, so while that's happening, I'm going to prep the new oil filter. Alright, so this is the new filter. So what you want to do is get a little bit of oil, fresh oil, and you just want to lubricate the new O-ring. Put a little bit in the threads. Okay, so now you just want to thread on the new filter. Would have been easier to do if I had have just removed the lip, the undershield at the front under the radiator. Live and learn. Alright, so now that's done, let's give a quick wipe. Okay, so fun fact, if you are gonna pour your oil in this way, it's gonna start like gulping it out. However, if you turn your oil bottle sideways, it flows out smoother without throwing the oil. Okay, so I put 5 litres of oil into the motor. I've pulled out the rim that was underneath, acting as a safety guard. Now to slowly drop the car back down. Now ideally you want the car completely level. I've got it on the ramps. I'll let it sit for a few minutes and then check the level. It will be slightly off. That's okay. I can then roll the car off the ramps, let it sit, check it again, top it up as needed. But for now, we're good to go. Alright, we're right on the full line. Not bad at all. So obviously there still was a little bit of oil in there. Now to give it another once over underneath, make sure there's no oil leaking. Alright, so there's a little trick that I'd learnt a few years ago with the Statesmans and the Caprices. I believe the VR, I know it worked on my VS Statesman onwards, so where you've got your odometer readings and that, it should also work on the Chevy counterparts of these. If you hold the mode and the up button when you turn on the car, it should bring up a digital readout, oil pressure, fuel pressure, digital speedo. Alright, so we've got volts. If I press mode again, volts, fuel 1.7. Now, I don't know how well you can see. So right here it says speed with digital speedometer. Yeah, fuel remaining, a bunch of other things I can't remember what they do. So you got your voltage. But yeah, something, I don't know if maybe you know or you didn't. Either way, now you do. I used to use it a lot. My speedometer on my VS Statesman used to play up occasionally. The needle would stick or jump up and down. So just a little tip. So it brings up the temperature of the motor, or the water coolant I should say. But yeah, something new. Alright, so now I'll leave this run for a couple of minutes, build up some pressure, and then we'll take a look underneath and make sure there's no oil leaks. And then I am going to take this up the back, degrease it, scrub it, hose it off, and then I'm going to fit it all back on. Okay, so I've degreased the under tray, dried it off both sides, nuts there. Now I'm going to put it all back together and then we're done. Alright guys, and that concludes today's episode. Basic maintenance, changing oil and oil filter. Next up will be changing the spark plugs, placing or checking the coil packs. I did notice when I was under there too that the power steering is leaking, so we'll get under there, check the boots, power steering rack, take it from there. Anyway guys, thanks for hanging around. Leave a like if you liked it, dislike if you didn't, and I'll catch you on the next episode.